Hello and welcome to the MediaTech Podcast. My name is Matt, and we have a super special guest today. We have Mike Doocy with us. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for acting excited about it. I appreciate it.
I am genuinely excited about this.
Good deal.
So you are the sports presenter over at Fox 4, is that correct?
Sports presenter. I've never heard it put quite that way, yes.
Awesome.
So sometimes known as a sports anchor or a sportscaster, yes, at Fox 4.
Well, all I know is I know that you're the voice that I hear on a very frequent basis. So good to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
So as I had told you, most of the students that come out of this school are going to graduate either in audio or video. So I wanted to kind of go over your average day at the studio and kind of how things go and where students can, like graduates can expect to go if they're going to go the route of news. But first, I want to touch on your background and kind of how you got to where you are.
You know, I grew up in a really small town in the Midwest, town of about 700 people in Iowa, and I was always loved sports, played sports as a kid, was infatuated with radio, especially as a young kid. The 50,000 watt AM stations that would bring in news and sports and music from big cities that I dream about visiting and all that stuff. So when I got to college, I realized I was not a college level athlete, but I wanted to stay close to sports. So I ended up getting into broadcasting, got a job at the college radio station at the University of Iowa, and eventually did radio after I got out of college for 5 or 6 years, and then moved into television and have been a sports TV guy now for all this time, 30 years or more, 25 here in Dallas.
Also, how was that switch from radio to TV?
Yeah, I never thought I wanted to do TV. I always loved doing play-by-play on radio, and I did a lot of that in small market radio, and I wanted to be a major college play-by-play guy, and I would try to get into my foot in the door with these jobs, and it seemed like the TV guys were always freelancing doing the college radio games, and so I thought, well, maybe I just need to do TV then, and it'll be a pathway to do play-by-play. And so I got a chance to do television. I worked at a station that had radio and TV in the same building. So the TV guys were sick one time, and so they called me in an emergency to do a TV sportscast. And eventually they used me on a little more frequent basis, and I ended up going the TV route.
Awesome. And so, I mean, has your passion always been sports, like since the very beginning? Obviously, combine that with your passion for radio and TV, but you said you've always been a sports guy. Is there any sport that you've identified with the most?
I always loved baseball most as a kid. If I was halfway decent at any sport, it was probably baseball. But I think in this market, it's the NFL, just because we cover it so much more extensively than anything else. And I think people, by and large, not everyone would agree, but by and large care about the NFL more than they care about other sports here. So that's what I've spent most time on.
Well, cool. So tell me, go over your average day going into the studio and how you might work with the producers. And for those that just don't know, much about how that kind of production goes, if you could walk me through that.
My day is such, we do a 30-minute show every night, sports show, 10:30 to 11. And so typically in the morning, I will kind of take stock of what's going on that day. I mean, it will have been planned before that morning, but just sort of look at what we have for the show that night. I'll send emails out to producers and say, here's what I think, we should do tonight, and just sort of put some sort of outline together for the day. And then the actual shift is a night shift, typically a 3 to 11 type shift most days. There are exceptions to that. Cowboys, for example, have their interview sessions early in the afternoon, so I'll go out to the Star tomorrow at 1 o'clock for that. That's when my day will start. But there are other days where I may go in a little later than 3. You never know. So it tends to balance itself out. But it's hard to quantify exactly what a typical day is, and that's one of the things I like most about the job and always have, is that there's always it's not predictable a lot of the time. There are different things that come up, and it's rarely boring. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm sure. I guess you're always having to pay attention, like before you go in every day, of what's going on with the different games and all that. I mean, does that fill your time outside of the office and the studio? Is just always checking up and always looking, all that up?
That's a big part of it. Again, with 22 minutes to fill every night. We come up with segment ideas, what we're going to talk about this tonight. It's not necessarily highlights what we do anymore or even sound bites, but it's topics. This is what people are talking about. I listen to a lot of sports talk radio. I pay a lot of attention to Twitter and other forms of social media just to kind of see what is trending, to use that cliche. So we try to build on that. And then if an interview needs to be shot or an event needs to be shot, we do our best to try to get out and supplement our show with that video or that audio.
And how often or how much of your time is spent like actually in the studio as opposed to out doing field work?
Quite a bit in the studio. That's changed through the years. We do probably fewer live shots than we used to. It's just a matter of resources, frankly. But I'm probably in studio 80% of the time and maybe 20% out doing interviews or actually covering events.
Awesome. And so for your in-studio work, how is the studio actually like laid out technically? So like if you're talking about camera operators and audio personnel and all of that, like who do you work with most closely and all of that?
In our sports department, I work most closely with our producer, who's the guy who puts together our show every night. I work with a photographer. Sometimes if I'm out on a shoot, I have a co-anchor for that show. I'll work with her and we'll go back and forth throughout the day as to what should be on the show that night and what shouldn't, and kind of bat around some ideas there. To a certain extent, we'll work with the director. We've got a great director for our show who wants to always do innovative things, and we'll talk about different camera angles to use and different ways to shoot interviews, whatever the case may be there. Sometimes and I try to avoid this as much as possible, working with a news manager who will decide whether I get those resources or not.
Oh, yeah.
So I will be pleading for resources in some cases. So those are the people I tend to work with most closely. In terms of the technical layout, the studio is, and you've been in enough studios, it's pretty typical. We have, I think, 4 studio cameras in our new studio. Robotic cameras. They've always been that way. In the 25 years that I've been there, we had to be one of the first stations to have those. We don't have camera operators.
Oh, really? That's
we have a floor director, though, stage manager, if you will. So 4 of those cameras. We have a main news set and then a side sports set that we use for our show. There are 5 or 6 different locations that are lit for on-air talent. So if a reporter's pitching to a package in the studio, they can do it from those different locations. There's another on-camera location in our newsroom and the weather set in the newsroom as well. There's an auxiliary studio off the main studio that's used typically for our morning show for a cooking segment or maybe a music segment, or if the Humane Society has a pet in there, that type of thing. There's a couch and that type of more informal setting. So, and we have a control room that's similar to the one we're sitting in right now with the huge control board, and that's where our director and our producers sit during the actual show. So pretty run-of-the-mill TV stuff.
That's awesome. One thing I've always been terrified of, because I've produced content mostly for social media, and that's been my career thus far, I've always been terrified of anything approaching live. Was that difficult for you, or does that ever get in your head that, we're producing stuff that's live or, gonna go on the air very quickly, and you got to really mind what you say, and the camera angles have to be perfect and all that. Does that ever get in your head, or has that ever?
Well, now that you're mentioning Matt, it will be in my head constantly. I've never thought about it before, never worried about it, but I'm not sure I can go on.
Oh,
no. Early, like anybody, I think early on when I was doing TV, I was terrified on camera because I'd been a radio guy. I didn't even want to be a TV guy. And the thought of actually having to figure out, it's like Ricky Bobby, what to do with my hands, that type of deal. And it's not like I'm the most dynamic personality on TV anyway, after all these years, but early on, it was just no facial expression whatsoever. And so I suppose I was a little more worried about it then than I am now. I don't know. I'm jinxing myself by saying this. The good thing about doing sports is very rarely are you dealing with life and death matters.
Oh, yeah.
So if you do make a mistake, you can almost always laugh it off, have some fun with it, or just pretend like it didn't happen. So I guess I don't worry about it that much. With that said, I don't mind recording segments ahead of time, like if we're doing a guest segment, just because I think it's cleaner that way. And we very rarely start over. It's not like we're doing it just in case there's a mistake. It's just because I think the guest is more comfortable if it's not live, and it helps in terms of inserting video later and stuff. It's just less likely to be an error in that regard. But live is just part of the deal. And if it's in studio, it's usually, I don't want to say easy. The environment is controlled. Where it gets more challenging is if you're out in the field and it's loud or it's windy or your equipment isn't working exactly as it should.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the studio, everything's already completely set up. So, I mean, by the time you get in there and all the producers are in there, you're just ready to roll. Is that about right?
We have a stage manager who makes sure the cameras are in place, and the person who runs the robotic cameras from the control room makes sure those, and the stage manager makes sure the lights are on the way they should be. And those have been positioned by, I would say a lighting director, but we don't have one. Whoever's in charge of that, who's ever in charge of that now, make sure that the lights make me look only 59 instead of 60. But yeah, it's, by the time I get in there, it is all pretty much in place. The mics are ready to go, and we do our mic tests ahead of time, and once in a great while, if you're recording something, maybe there's a camera that's slightly out of place or a graphic that's wrong that has to be redone. But for the most part, that's all ready to go. Mm-hmm.
And when you do pre-recorded segments, how much do you have hands-on with like the post-production of those segments that before they go on air?
I don't do any editing. Like I don't do any video editing. I wish I knew how to edit video. The last video I knew how to edit was tape to tape, unfortunately. And I didn't exactly keep up with the technology. But thankfully, I have talented professionals who are able to do some magic in terms of video editing. I will have a hand in it in terms of, if we're putting a package together, like from the Star tomorrow, quite often I'll pick the sound bites that we'll use. I'll write the track, the audio track that I'll read, and then somebody else, typically our producer, will put the actual package together. If we record a studio segment with guests, then our producer will put the B-roll in later.
And how quick, like on average, does a pre-recorded segment have to be edited and approved and ready to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like if we record a segment for 10:30, we have a window from after the early news until about 8 o'clock, so like 6:45 to 8 that we record it. So there's usually a pretty good amount of time to get that together. Where it gets dicey is if you're bringing something in from the outside. If there's a game, like a Mavs game, and you want to get post-game with Mark Cuban turned around for 10:30 and the game ends at 10:10.
Oh my gosh.
Then it gets a little bit more challenging. So, it becomes a little more of a team effort there, ideally, where you have somebody who's able to watch the actual feed as it's coming in and log, okay, Cuban said this at 10:10:41 until 10:10:59. There's the soundbite, and the out cue is go to hell, and here it is, and this will be the soundbite. And then somebody will actually edit the video.
Gosh, that's insane, like that amount of turnaround, and that there has to be someone obviously paying that much attention and writing down that time code.
And that's in a perfect world. Sometimes we're already out on the set, and the producer or the editor is just watching the feed and picking whatever he or she thinks is a soundbite that will work. So you need somebody who knows what they're doing and knows not to put profanity on the air, little things like that, since it's not a podcast.
Well, even still, you said, ideally you'd have a few hours. That just to anybody outside of the news cycle would think, oh my gosh, a few hours to shoot and edit and get something approved to go on TV. That sounds nuts. Like that's got to be a hectic turnaround sometimes, even when it's not pushing, to the last minute.
Yeah, it depends how long the segment is too. If it's a 9 or 10 minute segment and there's a bunch of video, a bunch of B-roll to put in there, obviously, in a perfect world, you have a few hours to put that together. But our guys are so good when it comes. They're so fast as editors and know how to use all the bells and whistles on those editing programs. It's just, I marvel at what they're able to do.
Yeah, that's insane to turn around and making it so polished too, just in a few hours. It's crazy.
It really is.
So for anybody that's looking to, from a technical aspect, get into news, they think they might enjoy that quick level of turnaround or be involved in sports in such a direct way. Do you have any advice to kids coming out of college on where to go, who to talk to, just general career advice?
I think my advice would be, and I think most kids in college programs now they're already doing this, but know how to shoot video, because even in top 10 markets now, there are what we euphemistically call multimedia journalists, MMJs, right? And it's backpack journalists, which basically means you're shooting your own stuff. And that used to be unheard of in a top 25 market. There would always be a photographer and a reporter, and never the twain shall meet. But now, a lot of times, even if you want to be on TV, you're shooting your own video. So know how to shoot, know how to set up a tripod to shoot your own stand up, know how to light the subject, know how to, and especially in sports, you need to know how to shoot games, and I did that in smaller markets. I've never had to do it here, but in the market where I worked before here, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as the main guy on a Friday night, I'd be out shooting 2 high school football games, and we'd have 4 or 5 other shooters out doing the same, and everybody pull it together at the last minute. So I guess to answer your question, that would be one skill that I think would be important to have. Just, it sounds trite, but just know how to do a bunch of different things. It's more valuable than ever to have a bunch of different skills right now, and not just being able to look into a camera and sound good and look good. It needs to be more than that. And that's just the way the business is trending, and it's not going to go back to the way it was.
So in your career preparing, for getting into TV, I want to ask, did you get into any classes, like acting classes or any of that, or even makeup? And not only that, but prior to going on air, do you have any, preparations that you do? And also, how does like the makeup and all that go?
As I mentioned, I was in radio and then went directly into TV, and I did not take acting classes. I was Curly my senior year in Oklahoma, though. And there is a bright golden haze on the meadow, by the way. And the corn is as high as an elephant's eye. And it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Anybody know the next words there? Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day.
I just want to say you're the first person to sing on this
I got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way. Didn't take acting classes. It wouldn't have been a bad idea, frankly. I think it would have helped my performance on air. Maybe it still would. I don't know. I think I was always very observant of what other people were doing on TV and radio, for that matter. I always studied the people whom I admired and probably tried to emulate them somewhat. So to the extent that I took a class, maybe that was the class, just me trying to teach myself how I wanted to do this thing. Makeup. We had a makeup artist for our primetime shows early in my time at Channel 4, probably the first 15 years or so. And, she was great. Just, I didn't know anything, about how to make myself up before my experience in major market television. And so learned some things from her that I probably still take with me. I'm probably too lazy when it comes now to how I make myself up. I just use a MAC pressed powder and a brush and try to take the shine off and even things out a little bit, but while not hiding my naturally ruddy masculine complexion, because we don't want that to totally go away. Was there something else in there too? And
do you have any like preparations just to get yourself in the right headspace or anything to go live or to go on air?
Yeah, when we do our show now, and I've talked about this a million times because it's still, our show is a year old now, our 30-minute show, but it was a big change, for me, because I was used to doing 5-minute at most sportscasts, during the week, and now we're doing a long form show every night. So I think it's more important for me than it used to be, if it's possible, to take 15 minutes ahead of the show to really look over the scripts, to really look over the rundown, just so I have a good idea in my head. I'm going to have a teleprompter when I get out there, but there's more non-scripted talk in this show than I've been used to at some times. So maybe write a few notes on a script, just have in mind, okay, I want to make this point here, I want to make that point there, and just have more of a working knowledge of the entire show before I go out. So on a perfect night, and I'm not always afforded this opportunity, just take a few minutes there just so I can have a good grasp of what the show should be.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Mike, for joining us. I want to encourage anybody listening to hit the subscribe button. If you're watching this on YouTube or anywhere else, just hit that follow button and come join or come check out MediaTech. They will offer you free tours. They have locations in Dallas and Houston. Amazing production facilities for audio, video, film, soon to be makeup and acting, and lots of other programs that are awesome for the media industry. Check out mediatech.edu. And again, Mike Doocy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
it was
Matt.
a pleasure.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.